Imagine the dust, like literally blowing off these decades-old, highly classified manila folders.
Right, the classic top secret files.
Yeah, exactly. Because for years, the topic of UFOs, it was entirely relegated to whispered rumors or like late night radio shows.
Oh yeah, string-covered conspiracy boards and basements.
Totally. But right now we're entering what a lot of people are finally calling the age of disclosure.
Which is a huge shift. I mean, it really is.
It's massive. Information that was once locked behind very thick, very classified walls is finally entering the public conversation. And this moment, it just feels like a genuine turning point in how humanity views the unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Right. It feels that way because the actual nature of the data we're allowed to look at has fundamentally changed.
Right.
We're no longer relying on third-hand stories or blurry photographs that have zero context. We're looking at a foundational bureaucracy of the phenomenon itself.
Which brings us perfectly to our mission for this deep dive. Welcome to part 1 of a massive multi-part series where we are examining newly released UFO and UAP files. And these are deeply connected to the FBI, the U.S. military, and the government at large.
Yeah, they're the real primary source material.
Exactly. And just to be incredibly clear about our focus today, for you, the listener, we are looking strictly at the raw data pulled directly from the archives.
Right, no speculation, just the paper trail.
Just the paper. We're examining military reports, civilian sightings, and crucially, and this is the big one, the individuals connected to these cases and their actual verifiable credentials.
Because that matters.
Yeah.
Who is seeing it matters just as much as what they see.
100%. We're talking about commercial pilots, military radar operators, intelligence officials, basically the people whose literal job it is to know what is in the sky.
Setting the ground rules for how we approach a data set this large is just, well, it's vital. Our tone has to be curious, obviously, but firmly grounded in the documentation.
Yeah, we're not just taking everything at face value.
Exactly. We're keeping an open mind, but we are blindly accepting every single report as absolute proof of extraterrestrial life.
Right. Because some of it is definitely noise.
A lot of it is noise. The focus has to remain on the evidence, the sworn testimony, and the undeniable patterns. The patterns that emerge when you look at these files in aggregate.
It's about stepping back and seeing the whole board.
Yeah. We need to explore the underlying reasons why these specific cases attracted such high-level government attention. And conversely, why this information was systematically minimized or even mocked in the past.
Which is a huge part of the story, the cover-up aspect.
It is. And we can do all of that without presenting pure speculation as confirmed fact.
So let's begin this investigation right where the modern era of this phenomenon actually started, with the people whose eyes are trained to navigate the atmosphere.
The aviators.
The aviators, yeah. We are starting with the witnesses, and you really cannot talk about the origins of this without looking at Kenneth Arnold.
Oh, absolutely not. He's ground zero.
Right. So the year is 1947, and Arnold is not a guy who just, happened to glance up from a picnic.
No, not at all.
He is a highly experienced civilian pilot. The FBI files specifically note his pilot's license number, which is 333487.
That level of detail in the file is important. It shows they vetted his background immediately.
Exactly. And he is flying a Kalair airplane, which it's a 3-place single-engine ship, and it's specifically designed for extremely high-performance mountain work.
Yeah, mountain flying's no joke.
Right. It has a very low stall speed, making it perfect for slow, methodical observation over super rugged terrain.
And that context regarding his aircraft is crucial for evaluating his testimony.
How so? Like, why does the plane matter?
Well, Kalair A2, it was used for search and rescue, for spotting forest fires. Arnold is intimately familiar with the visual landscape of the Cascade Mountains. He knows the prevailing weather patterns, the mechanics of flight.
So he knows what belongs there and what doesn't.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
His eyes are essentially trained instruments. They're calibrated to look for anomalies in a massive visual field. So when an aviator with that specific background reports an anomaly, it carries a vastly different weight than a random civilian report.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So he's flying near Mount Rainier in Washington State, and he's actually looking for a crashed Marine Corps transport plane.
Right, he was on a search mission.
Yeah, and while he's looking, he sees a formation of objects, and the quote that made history, which is pulled right from his statement in the FBI files, is that they were flying, quote, like geese in a diagonal chain.
The flying saucer misquote comes from this, right?
Yeah, he said they moved like a saucer skipping across water, and the press ran with flying saucer. But the part that really caught the attention of military intelligence wasn't the shape initially. It was his speed estimate.
The math he did.
Yeah, the math. He calculated their speed at roughly 1,200 miles per hour. Let's put that in context for a second. In the summer of 1947, Chuck Yeager hadn't even officially broken the sound barrier in the Bell X-1 yet.
Which didn't happen until October of that year.
Right, so 1,200 miles per hour is, like, mind-blowing to them.
And breaking the sound barrier, it's not just about flying faster. It requires a fundamental shift in aerodynamics.
Because of the air resistance.
Yeah, exactly. When you approach Mach 1, the air in front of the craft literally compresses. It creates a massive shock wave that causes severe drag and structural stress.
So a normal plane would just fall apart.
It would tear itself to pieces.
Yeah.
The aircraft of 1947, with their straight wings and propeller-driven designs, could not handle those forces. So Arnold is reporting multiple objects moving at speeds that completely defied the known physical aerodynamic capabilities of any human-made aircraft on Earth at that exact moment.
And he didn't just guess the speed, right? Like, he timed them.
Yeah, he's doing the math based on known geographical landmarks. He clocked them between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. He knew the distance, he timed their transit, and he arrived at an impossible number.
Okay, here is the detail in the FBI file that absolutely fascinates me. It's not just the speed, it's his mechanical, structural description of the objects themselves.
The drawing he submitted.
Yes. We actually have his drawing from the file. He explicitly states they did not whirl or spin, but they seemed to be in a fixed, forward-facing position.
Right, they weren't spinning tops.
Exactly. He described them as mirror-bright, but he noted their geometry. He said they seemed longer than they were wide, and their thickness was about 120th of their width.
Okay, that 1:20 thickness-to-width ratio is just a staggering piece of observational data.
Really? Why that specific ratio?
Because you take that ratio to an aeronautical engineer today, they will immediately recognize it as a description of a highly advanced lifting body.
Like a stealth bomber shape.
Exactly. He is describing a flying wing or a pure disc that completely lacks the conventional fuselage, the horizontal stabilizers, and the tail fins of 1940s aviation.
So it's basically just a wing.
Just a wing. And the problem with flying a shape like that is pitch stability.
It wants to flip over.
Yeah, without a tail, a flying wing wants to tumble out of the sky. To keep a 1:20 ratio lifting body stable at Mach 1.5, you need advanced fly-by-wire computer systems. Systems making thousands of micro-adjustments per second to the control surfaces.
Which obviously did not exist in 1947.
Not even close.
Yep.
Arnold was describing an aerodynamic profile and a level of flight control that human engineers would spend the next 50 years trying to perfect. Eventually leading to things like the B-2 Spirit.
Wow. And I read his official statement, and you know what's crazy? The overwhelming emotion in his writing isn't awe or even fear. It's intense frustration.
He was incredibly annoyed.
So annoyed. He points out in his letter that the FBI hadn't even come to investigate him for the authenticity of his story.
They just kind of ignored him at first.
Yeah, he hadn't been asked to submit to a mental or physical examination by the authorities to, test his sensory capabilities. He was basically throwing his hands up, saying, look, I just reported something that defies known physics in our airspace. Why aren't you interrogating me to figure out if I'm crazy or if I'm right?
And the psychology of his reaction there, it reveals a profound underlying assumption about his own government.
What do you mean?
Well, he writes that he will go so far as to assume that if military intelligence wasn't aware of what he observed, they would have been the very first people to visit him.
Oh, I see.
Right. His logical conclusion as an aviation professional was deductive. He thought, if I report a revolutionary technology and the military doesn't care, it means the military already knows what these things are.
Ah, so he assumed it was a secret U.S. project.
Exactly. And this establishes the foundational tension between credible witnesses and the government. The witnesses assume the government is hiding a secret project, while the government, internally, as we'll see, is often just as baffled and scrambling for answers.
That is such a good point.
Yeah.
So let's move from a lone mountain pilot to a multi-crew commercial flight. Still in 1947, but August 4th.
Just a couple months later.
Yeah. We have a Pan American Airways crew flying a massive Constellation aircraft. They are on a route from Gander, Newfoundland, down to LaGuardia in New York. So we're dealing with a totally different environment here.
Totally different. A multi-crew environment in a commercial airliner adds a huge layer of corroboration.
Because it's not just one guy alone in a cockpit.
Right, you aren't relying on a single perspective. Furthermore, flying a constellation required immense precision. Navigators in the 1940s were plotting courses using celestial navigation, wind drift calculations, radio beacons.
He couldn't just rely on GPS?
No GPS at all. They were hyper-aware of their altitude, their heading, and the exact position of celestial bodies.
So the navigator on this specific flight is a man named Walter the Flight, and the file explicitly notes his credentials. He had 5 years of experience as a navigator, including work with Pan Am during the war.
Very credible guy.
Very. He's sitting in the co-pilot seat. He spots an object about 1,000 feet below their plane, but he doesn't immediately, scream for the pilot to look.
This is my favorite part of this case.
Right. He studies it for a full 30 seconds before even calling the pilot's attention to it.
And that 30-second delay is the absolute hallmark of a trained observer.
Because he's trying to figure it out himself first.
Exactly. He's running an internal diagnostic. He's trying to fit this object into a known terrestrial category before escalating the situation. He is actively testing hypotheses in his head.
Like checking off boxes.
Right. Is it a reflection on the plexiglass? No, the parallax shift doesn't match. Is it a weather balloon? No, the relative speed is wrong. Is it a conventional military aircraft? The shape doesn't match any known silhouette.
And only then does he speak up.
Only after he exhausts his conventional database does he tap the pilot on the shoulder.
And the description he gives after that 30-second analysis is incredibly specific. He describes a deep gold-colored object. Its surface was clearly reflecting light, proving it's metallic, or at least highly polished.
Solid structure.
Yeah. It was elliptical in shape. And he adds this fascinating aerodynamic detail. He said it was blunted at the ends. He estimated it was about 15 feet in length and 2 to 3 feet in depth, and it was traveling at about 175 miles per hour.
And the pilot saw it too, right?
Yes. The pilot, Mr. Powell, actually banked the massive Constellation aircraft to get a better look down at it, and he confirmed the exact same visual details.
Let's analyze that shape for a second. An elliptical object with blunted ends, 15 feet long and 3 feet deep.
So kind of like a flying cigar?
Essentially a thick cylinder or an elongated egg shape.
Hmm.
Now, a blunted end on an aircraft traveling at relatively low speeds, like 175 miles per hour, is going to create massive aerodynamic drag if it's relying on standard forward thrust.
Because it's not pointy.
Right. It lacks the streamlined, tapered nose required to cleanly pierce the air. A ship like that suggests a propulsion system that honestly doesn't care about traditional aerodynamics.
Meaning what, exactly?
Perhaps one that manipulates the air, or even gravity, around the craft itself, rather than trying to brute force push through the atmosphere.
Which perfectly brings up another highly specific report from that exact same geographical area. Just a few weeks prior to that flight, in July 1947 in Newfoundland, a Pan Am mechanic named Robert W. Leidy was interrogated by intelligence officers.
Another aviation professional.
Yep, a mechanic. He observed a phenomenon that left a physical alteration in the atmosphere. The interviewer in the file was trying to determine if the object left a standard exhaust trail, like a jet engine.
Like a contrail.
Yeah, but Leidy rejected that completely. He said it left a bluish streak that actually caused the clouds to break open. And when the intel officer pressed him for an analogy, he said, quote, "I would not say it was exhaust. It looked similar to that of a pebble leaving a ring in the pond."
Wow. Okay, to understand why that phrasing is so important, we really have to look at fluid dynamics.
Okay, lay it on me.
Think about throwing a heavy stone into a perfectly still stream. The stone doesn't just pull a trail of water behind it. The kinetic energy violently displaces the water outward in an expanding shock wave, a concentric ring.
Right, it pushes the water away.
Exactly. A standard combustion jet engine leaves a linear trail of unburnt fuel, heat, and condensation that lingers in a straight line.
Like a line drawn across the sky.
Right. But Leidy is describing something entirely different. He is describing an energetic displacement of the cloud layer, an expanding void or ring, literally pushing the atmosphere outward.
That is so weird.
It suggests the craft is projecting a field or a wave that physically parts the air, rather than just burning fuel to push itself forward.
So he's describing advanced physics without knowing the terms.
Precisely. His 1940s engineering vocabulary simply doesn't have a word for a magnetohydrodynamic drive or a localized gravity field. So he reaches for the most accurate natural analogy he can find, which is a shock wave in water.
That distinction between an exhaust trail and an expanding displacement wave is just incredible. But okay, let me push back here for a second.
Go for it.
As compelling as these pilots and mechanics are, Human eyes are still biological lenses connected to a highly subjective brain.
Right. I mean, think of a pilot like a trained detective witnessing a crime scene. Their eyes are trained to notice the make of the car, the height of the suspect.
Mhm.
But even detectives succumb to cognitive bias.
Sure, human memory is fallible.
Right. They suffer from fatigue. And in these very files, we have a confidential report from a pilot with 2,800 hours of flying time, ranging from primary trainers all the way up to four-engine B-29 bombers.
Now, a combat-experienced aviator with nearly 3,000 hours in heavy bombers is not someone who gets easily spooked by strange lights.
Exactly my point. But in his own report, this guy actively questions his own sanity.
Really, he doubts himself.
Oh, completely. He details that prior to sighting this unidentified object, he had been flying for 14 and a half hours straight. He admits, in all frankness, that he was utterly exhausted.
14 hours in a 1940s cockpit is brutal. Right, and he questions if he might have been suffering from hypoxia, a want of oxygen. And the craziest part of his statement is where he writes that he was literally talking to himself out loud in the cockpit.
To keep himself awake.
To ground himself. He says, quote, "I took myself aside and said, 'Come now, Johnson. Don't be stupid.'" He was trying to beat into his own head that he wouldn't fall victim to the power of suggestion or self-hypnosis just because flying saucers were in the news.
Ah, he is describing the psychological battle against autokinesis.
What's that?
It's an optical illusion where a stationary point of light in a dark or featureless environment appears to move, simply because the eye has no reference point.
Right. So if a pilot with nearly 3,000 hours is sitting in his cockpit looking at an object performing erratic maneuvers and his first desperate instinct is, "I must be hallucinating from oxygen deprivation and fatigue," doesn't that throw a massive wrench into the reliability of eyewitness testimony?
I see where you're going.
I mean, doesn't it prove that the brain will invent things when under extreme stress?
It's a very valid challenge. But if you look at the epistemology of his report, that intense self-doubt actually makes his final conclusion exponentially more credible.
Wait, how does doubting himself make him more credible?
Because he is establishing that his baseline is extreme, hostile skepticism. He's actively trying to debunk his own vision. He knows the symptoms of hypoxia. He knows how fatigue impairs peripheral vision. He is applying the scientific method in real time within a freezing cockpit, desperately trying to eliminate variables like weather, optical illusions, or balloons.
He's trying to prove himself wrong.
Exactly. And what happens when he runs out of variables?
He has to accept it.
Yes, he reluctantly, almost painfully, accepts the data his eyes are providing. He notes in the file that if the object had moved in a jerky or indistinct fashion, he would have just written it off as a corpuscle moving across his retina, an illusion.
All right.
But he explicitly states, and I quote, "The maneuver described by the object when its edge was presented to me convinces me that I saw an object actually performing in an erratic flight path."
He didn't want to believe it.
He really didn't. The impression was simply too vivid, too three-dimensional, and too structurally sound to be a trick of the light. We aren't dealing with people who desperately want to believe in science fiction here. We are reading the reports of professionals forced to accept an impossible reality because they have ruthlessly eliminated every other rational explanation.
Wow. Okay, framing it as hostile skepticism completely flips the narrative for me. But even with hostile skepticism, a human eye is still fallible.
True.
So what happens when we remove the biological lens entirely? What happens when human sightings are corroborated by cold, unfeeling machines?
Now we're getting into the hard data.
And more terrifyingly, what happens when those machines are guarding the most sensitive military real estate on the planet?
Yeah, the moment the phenomenon intersects with early warning radar systems and nuclear facilities, the government's internal posture goes from, curious to a full-blown national security crisis.
Okay, picture this for a second. It's March 1950. The Cold War is rapidly escalating. The Soviets had detonated their first atomic bomb the previous year.
In 1949, right?
Yeah. So the paranoia in the U.S. is absolute, and we have a priority confidential military message sent from Fort McPherson in Georgia to the Department of the Army's Director of Intelligence. It concerns a radar station located near Knoxville, Tennessee.
And the geography here is the entire point. Knoxville isn't just a random city. It sits right next to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
Okay, break down Oak Ridge for us.
For listeners who might not be familiar with the granular history of the Manhattan Project, Oak Ridge was the headquarters of the Atomic Energy Commission.
The AEC.
Right. It was the site of the K-25 and Y-12 plants. These were massive facilities dedicated to the isotopic enrichment of uranium for atomic weapons.
So basically the place where we made the bombs.
Exactly. In 1950, it was arguably the most secure, highly classified, and heavily defended location in the United States.
Okay. So on March 1st at 2135 hours, this radar station paints an object on a scope at an altitude of 40,000 feet. The object is 18 miles from Knoxville. But the red alert detail in this memo is this. The object was hovering directly over Oak Ridge.
Right over the enrichment plants.
Yes. The AEC Security Division chief at Oak Ridge goes into an absolute panic. They contact Smyrna Air Base in Nashville, demanding to know if there are any flight plans for a military or civilian plane in that vicinity.
And what does Smyrna say?
The answer comes back negative. No flight plans. Zero.
And we really have to understand the technical limitations of 1950s radar to grasp how crazy this is.
How bad was the radar back then?
Well, they were using early plan position indicator scopes, essentially cathode ray tubes painting a sweeping beam. Radar in 1950 struggled to track objects at 40,000 feet
Why is 40,000 feet hard?
because it required bouncing radio waves off a target nearly 8 miles up in the atmosphere and then receiving a strong enough return signal to paint a solid blip on the screen.
So a bird wouldn't show up.
No way. For an object to return a clear, sustained radar signature at 40,000 feet in 1950, it had to be a massive, solid, highly reflective structure. It couldn't be a flock of birds or a thin weather balloon.
It was a huge piece of metal.
Exactly.
So the situation repeats itself the very next day. March 2nd, at 1105 hours, in broad daylight, the radar station picks up the object again. Exact same altitude, 40,000 feet. 18 miles from Knoxville.
They came back.
They came back. The AEC security chief again calls Smyrna Air Base. Negative results. No one is supposed to be up there. I mean, it's like finding an unidentified, completely silent drone hovering directly over Fort Knox and realizing your entire air defense network has absolutely no idea whose it is, where it came from, or how to shoot it down.
The panic must have been unreal.
Oh, it was. The AEC security chief was so flustered that he actually asked Smyrna Air Base to send a qualified radar operator to check the Oak Ridge equipment. He was essentially hoping the machine was broken rather than facing the reality of a breach.
Please tell me the machine is broken.
Right. But Smyrna didn't even have anyone qualified to send.
Oh my God. That detail perfectly encapsulates the technological vulnerability of the era. They have undeniable machine confirmation bearing, distance, and altitude of an object violating restricted airspace over a nuclear weapons facility. And their response is a bureaucratic scramble.
They couldn't do anything.
They are completely powerless to identify or intercept it.
And the radar data is actually backed up by civilian evidence right outside the gates of the base. We have a clipping in the files from the Knoxville News Sentinel from July 1947. A man named W.R. Presley, living on Illinois Avenue in Oak Ridge, noticed he had one exposure left on his camera roll.
Just a local guy?
Yeah, just a guy. He turned and snapped a picture of what he called a flying saucer over the mountain ridge. He got the film developed, the newspaper published it, and that photograph ended up right in an FBI file with the caption, "Mr. Presley says this picture has all of Oak Ridge talking."
So we have a convergence of data points here. We have highly trained pilot sightings, multi-day radar trackings over nuclear sites, and civilian photographs.
All pointing to the same thing.
Right. But the archives take us one step further. We're moving into a realm that moves beyond lights in the sky and blips on a screen. We are moving into physical terrestrial evidence.
Okay, yeah. Prepare yourself for this document because it fundamentally alters the narrative.
It's wild.
This is a memo from September 1948. It originates from the Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which, as we know, was essentially the epicenter of foreign technology exploitation.
The reverse engineering guys.
Yeah. The memo is directed to the director of the FBI, specifically requesting the assistance of the FBI laboratory, and the subject line is simply, Project Cezanne.
Project Cezanne is historically massive. It was the very first official U.S. Air Force investigation into unidentified flying objects. It predates Project Grudge and Project Blue Book.
And what the engineers at Wright-Patterson are shipping to the FBI lab is just astonishing.
What did they send?
They sent a physical box of dirt. The letter states, and I'm quoting this verbatim from the archive, accompanying this letter is a small sample of soil. This soil was taken from a depression reputed to have been caused by a flying saucer, described as being approximately 2 feet in diameter and 1 foot thick, which supposedly settled gently to the ground, rebounded to a height of about 20 feet, and then continued on its journey.
Wow. Let's dissect the physics described in that single sentence.
Please do.
We're talking about a physical object with specific dimensions 2 feet across, 1 foot thick. This isn't a light in the sky. It descends, makes physical, kinetic contact with the Earth, creates a depression deep enough to be measured, and then demonstrates an incredible propulsion capability by rebounding straight up 20 feet before flying off.
Wait, how does an object physically rebound 20 feet? I mean, if I drop a 2-foot-wide disc of solid steel, it's going to hit the dirt with a thud and stay there.
It's not a bouncy ball.
Exactly. It might bounce an inch. To bounce 20 feet, it either has to be made of some incredibly elastic material, or it has to actively fire a propulsion system right at the moment of impact.
And that is exactly the puzzle the military was facing. Because if it relies on a chemical rocket or a jet exhaust to rebound 20 feet, the blast would scorch the Earth, incinerate the grass, and leave undeniable chemical residue.
A huge burn mark.
Right. But the description says it settled gently and then rebounded. It implies a mastery of inertia and localized gravity. A craft that small, behaving with that much kinetic energy without a massive exhaust signature, it basically violates Newtonian mechanics as they understood them in 1948.
The local witnesses knew they had a crime scene, too. The file notes that the depression was immediately covered by a large wash tub to protect it from the elements.
Good thinking on their part.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a heavy rain subsequently filled the depression about 1/3 full of water before the military could extract a pristine soil sample, but they still scooped up that mud, sealed it, and shipped it to the FBI.
But the most revealing part of this document isn't the dirt itself, is it?
No. It's what Wright-Patterson asked the FBI to look for in the dirt.
The analysis request is the absolute smoking gun of their internal thinking.
So the memo states that headquarters desires to ascertain if there are traces of unusual elements or alloys adhering to the surface of the soil particles.
Looking for bits of the ship.
Right. They want to know if any abnormality in the structure exists, showing that the soil was subjected to intense heat, gases, or, and this is the absolute kicker, radioactive substances.
Radioactive substances.
Yes.
Think about the massive shift we're seeing here in the military's hypothesis. We have moved from Kenneth Arnold seeing shiny objects over a mountain to the Air Material Command, specifically asking the FBI laboratory to run spectroscopy and Geiger countertests on dirt from a landing site.
It escalates so fast.
Yeah.
But why the FBI lab specifically?
Because in 1948, the FBI lab was a premier facility in the country for tracking atomic espionage and analyzing illicit radioactive materials.
Oh, it's a huge leap in logic for them. They aren't looking for weather balloon canvas. They are looking for isotopes.
Exactly. It raises the most critical, persistent question in the history of this phenomenon. Why does the proximity to nuclear and atomic facilities remain an undeniable pattern?
It's everywhere.
Everywhere. We have the object hovering over the uranium enrichment facilities at Oak Ridge. We have the military testing landing site soil for radiation. The phenomena seem inexorably drawn to our atomic capabilities.
Almost like they are monitoring us.
Either fueled by them, monitoring them, or attracted to the energetic signatures they create.
Okay, so if physical trace evidence is being shipped in boxes to federal labs and radar tracks are piling up over atomic sites, how on earth did the government manage the public narratives?
That is the million-dollar question.
I mean, what were they saying in press conferences versus what they were scrambling to figure out in classified briefings?
That dichotomy, the absolute public dismissal versus the frantic private panic, it defines the entire Cold War era of ufology.
The cover-up.
Yeah, the cover-up. The government essentially had to build a massive psychological dam to hold back a flood of public anxiety.
Let's look at how they built that dam. Because we have a fascinating military briefing document from May 1950. The subject is Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Flying Saucers. And what strikes me first is how far back the military analysts reach to contextualize this. They aren't just looking at the 1940s.
No, they realized this wasn't merely a post-World War II issue. The intelligence officers were trying to build a historical and epidemiological baseline for the sightings.
The briefing actually traces the history all the way back to the prophet Ezekiel in the 6th century BC.
Which is wild for a military document.
It explicitly quotes the biblical passage of, "A whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire unfolding itself, a wheel in the middle of a wheel." The United States military is utilizing biblical scripture in a classified briefing to establish a historical precedent for anomalous aerial craft.
It shows how deeply they were searching for analogous data. They were desperate.
Yeah. And then they bring the timeline forward to more recent history, specifically analyzing the 1946 ghost rockets seen over Sweden.
Right. Hundreds of people in Scandinavia reported seeing strange missile-like objects crashing in the lakes.
What did the military think those were?
The initial military speculation was that these were Soviet-guided missiles being tested over the Baltic Sea. The theory was that the Soviets had reverse-engineered the V-2 rockets captured at the former Nazi experimental station at Peenemünde.
Which honestly is a completely rational, grounded intelligence assessment for 1946.
Very rational. Operation Paperclip brought German scientists to the U.S., and the Soviet equivalent, Operation Ossoviakim, took German engineers to Russia. It made perfect sense to assume the ghost rockets were Soviet V-2 derivatives.
But this 1950 briefing document is invaluable because it officially outlines the 5 internal theories the U.S. military was juggling to explain the discs flying over America.
This is the core of their internal debate.
Let's read the 5 military theories straight from the file. Theory 1, spaceships from other planets. Theory 2, Soviet-guided missiles or aircraft, probably atomic-powered. Theory 3, U.S. experiments with new weapons. Theory 4, natural phenomena. Theory 5, mass hysteria or other psychological causes.
Those 5 bullet points encompass the entire spectrum of human anxiety in the mid-20th century.
They really do.
You have the fear of the unknown cosmos, the fear of the communist threat, the fear of an out-of-control military-industrial complex, and the fear of our own fragile psychology.
And the briefing document systematically attempts to dismantle them. First, they analyze Theory 1, spaceships.
How do they handle that one?
The document states that while it is not possible to categorically rule it out, they dismiss it on what they call reasonable grounds.
Reasonable grounds, right.
They argue that the level of technical achievement required to launch a missile from one planet to another, survive the transit, maneuver in our atmosphere, and return was several orders of magnitude beyond anything existing on Earth.
Sure, by 1950 standards.
They assumed that such an attempt would have inevitably resulted in deliberate landings or catastrophic crashes prior to this wave of sightings. They actually take time in the briefing to mock reports in the press of men only 18 inches tall as sheer fabrication.
They're projecting human aerospace limitations onto a hypothetical non-human intelligence.
That's a great way to put it.
They assume a spaceship would crash because human test planes crash all the time.
Right. So then they pivot to the immediate geopolitical threat, Theory 2, the Soviets.
And what's their conclusion there?
The document concludes there is absolutely no evidence that the Soviet Union possesses either guided missiles or disc-shaped aircraft capable of making round-trip flights across the globe to the U.S.
Which was accurate intelligence.
Furthermore, they note that the use of atomic energy for the propulsion of an aerial vehicle is still, quote, several years in the future. They logically argue that even if the Soviets had achieved atomic propulsion, their aeronautical engineers would put it in a conventional aircraft design like a heavy bomber.
Not a completely radical, highly complex flying disc.
Exactly.
It's a sound engineering argument based on incremental design. Why invent a completely new aerodynamic shape with unknown stability issues if you're just trying to test a new engine?
Right. So the briefing eliminates extraterrestrials as technologically improbable and eliminates the Soviets based on a lack of intelligence regarding advanced metallurgy and manufacturing.
And what about our own stuff? Theory 3.
They briefly dismiss Theory 3, U.S. experiments, stating flatly and unequivocally, the U.S. is not experimenting with any new weapon that could reasonably be mistaken or identified as a flying disc or saucer.
Which logically forces them into the only remaining bins. Theories 4 and 5. Natural phenomena and mass hysteria.
And that becomes the official mandated public line. The briefing states that the continued reporting of aerial phenomena must be attributed to mass hysteria caused by the present tenseness in the international situation.
Blaming the Cold War anxiety.
Exactly. Combined with the public's naive belief in science's ability to accomplish miracles and journalists creating a chain reaction of copycat reports, they officially blamed meteorological balloons, cosmic ray research balloons, reflections on aircraft canopies, and temperature inversions.
But as we know from the files we just analyzed, the 1,200 mile/hour radar tracks over Oak Ridge, the physical dirt samples rebounding 20 feet, the generals in that briefing room knew that mass hysteria doesn't leave radioactive depressions in the mud.
It doesn't trip radar at 40,000 feet either.
Mass hysteria doesn't trigger restricted airspace alarms. The official public stance was a manufactured off-ramp designed to de-escalate public anxiety.
And this brings us to the most famous bureaucratic off-ramp of all, Project Blue Book.
Ah, Blupka.
Our files outline the sheer, overwhelming volume of data they were processing. From 1947 onward, Project Blue Book logged an astonishing 10,147 sightings.
Over 10,000 reports.
10,000. And out of those, 646 remained entirely unexplained by any conventional means, even after rigorous scientific investigation.
Over 600 true unknowns.
Yet the main conclusion reached by the Air Force and pushed to the press was no threat. They stated there was no evidence of extraterrestrial origin or any indication of a threat to national security.
To publicly claim there is no threat, when your own data shows 646 unidentified hypersonic objects outmaneuvering your best interceptor jets and loitering over your atomic weapons facilities. It's a masterclass in bureaucratic doublespeak.
It really is.
It requires a level of cognitive dissonance that the public simply couldn't swallow.
And the public aggressively pushed back. The files frequently mention Major Donald Keyhoe. Keyhoe was a retired U.S. Marine Corps officer, a highly respected aviation writer, and the director of NECAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena.
He was a major figure back then.
He utilized his military credibility to publicly accuse the Air Force of conducting a long-term systematic whitewash. He insisted they were withholding critical information specifically for fear of causing widespread public panic.
Keyhoe was a persistent thorn in the side of the military establishment. He couldn't be easily dismissed as a crackpot, because he had rank, he understood aviation, and he was articulating exactly what a massive portion of the American public was feeling.
And the government was lying to their faces.
Exactly.
The pressure wasn't just coming from civilians either. Politicians realized it was a potent issue. House Republican leader Gerald Ford, representing Michigan, a state that had just experienced a massive, highly publicized flap of sightings, suggested it would be a very wholesome thing for Congress to conduct hearings on unidentified flying objects.
Gerald Ford.
Yeah. Ford literally told the press that an investigation would make the American people, quote, feel better.
So the Air Force realized their standard operating procedure of issuing press releases blaming swamp gas was failing. The public trust was eroding fast.
So what did they do?
They needed an appeal to supreme academic authority to shut the conversation down once and for all. They needed a hammer.
Enter the Condon Committee. The FBI files detail how the Air Force commissioned the University of Colorado, led by a highly respected physics professor named Dr. Edward U. Condon, to conduct an in-depth study of flying saucers.
A fully funded academic study.
The expected cost of the study, $300,000.
In the late 1960s, that is a staggering sum of money for an academic grant.
It's massive. The structural goal was to select several other prestige universities, involve about 100 credentialed scientists, and produce an independent, peer-reviewed report that the National Academy of Sciences would bless.
It was explicitly designed to be the definitive final word that would allow the Air Force to close Project Blue Book.
But the FBI files give us a hilarious and deeply revealing peek behind the curtain of this supposedly objective, rigorous academic study.
This part is amazing.
There is a UPI Newswire clipping retained in the file from January 1967. Dr. Condon publicly announced to a roomful of reporters that he had received a letter giving him the exact date and location where a flying saucer manned by persons from another planet would land on Earth.
And how did he treat that?
Condon smirked and told the press he was going to answer the letter and try to make friends with the space travelers.
It was a deeply unserious, flippant way for the head of a $300,000 government-funded scientific study to behave in front of the national media. It projected intense bias before the study even began.
And the FBI thought so too. On this exact news clipping in the archive, a high-ranking FBI official literally scrawled a handwritten note in the margin that says, quote, Condon is a publicity hound.
That single margin note is an incredible piece of historical evidence.
Why do you say that?
Because it shows the internal disdain between different branches of the government. The FBI, which was dealing with deadly serious counterintelligence threats and Soviet espionage, viewed this highly publicized, incredibly expensive academic committee as an absolute circus.
But I have to stop and analyze the logic here for a second.
Okay.
If the military truly, deep down in their bones, believed this was nothing but mass hysteria, temperature inversions, and a few misidentified weather balloons, why authorize a $300,000 grant for an academic study?
It's a lot of money for a balloon.
Right. And why was the FBI keeping tabs on the personalities of the scientists involved to the point of insulting them in internal memos? You don't spend that kind of money And you don't track the investigators if there isn't a massive smoldering fire beneath all that smoke.
You're touching on the core contradiction of the era. The Condon Committee was an instrument of political management, not an instrument of pure scientific inquiry. It was a pressure release valve.
Just to calm people down.
The government needed a prestigious university to produce a massive book that essentially told the public to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
But as the files show, the public was already wide awake, and they were tired of waiting for official answers.
Which perfectly explains what happened next. Because the U.S. government publicly minimized the phenomenon, they essentially created a massive, hungry vacuum of information. And citizens, scientists, and eventually international groups stepped right into that void to investigate the skies themselves.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human curiosity. When official channels shut down or lose credibility, grassroots organizations immediately spring up to bypass the gatekeepers.
We see this beautifully illustrated in a letter from the files sent directly to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover.
Hoover himself?
Yes, in December 1966, it's written by Judith Goodman, a student from Bradford, Pennsylvania. She's writing to the most feared law enforcement official in America for her science fair project.
The fact that a student is doing a science fair project on UFOs in 1966 tells you how deeply this subject had penetrated the cultural zeitgeist. It wasn't just in sci-fi magazines, it was in the classroom.
Her letter is so earnest, but the questions she asks possess a razor-sharp intuition. She writes, "Could you please send me any and all information you have on this subject? I would also appreciate any information you may have as to how many planes we have lost chasing UFDs."
Notice her specific terminology there. She says, UFDs, unidentified flying discs.
Right, she's precise. And then she asks the big ones. Why has this information been kept a secret? Why is it important to national defense? Also, would you happen to know if any other country besides ourselves have spotted UFDs in recent times?
This letter from a student perfectly captures the psychological mindset of the American public at the time. It is a potent blend of innocent curiosity and an inherent, deeply ingrained distrust of authority.
She just assumes they are lying.
She doesn't ask if the government is keeping secrets or if planes have been lost. She assumes it as a matter of empirical fact. The public intuitively felt the government was hoarding data.
And because the government wouldn't answer Judith Goodman or anyone else, civilian organizations decided to build their own data collection networks.
If you won't do it, we will.
Exactly. The files are full of these highly organized groups. Take the 1958 press release from the Aerial Phenomena Research Group based in Seattle. They had been studying the phenomenon rigorously since 1954. Their conclusion, based on compiling over 5,000 distinct eyewitness accounts and applying statistical sorting methods, was that a high percentage of these objects are intelligently controlled craft whose ports of origin are outside Earth's atmosphere.
They were applying their own data science to the problem. 5,000 accounts is a statistically significant data set. They were doing the work the Air Force claimed to be doing.
And then you have organizations that were far more aggressive in trying to integrate with the government apparatus. There are several fascinating documents regarding ICARF, the Intercontinental Aerial Research Foundation, based in Independence, Missouri.
What did they want?
They weren't just writing letters, they were practically begging the FBI to partner with them. They wanted the FBI to publish official notices in newspapers to help them set up civilian observer posts all over the United States, Canada, Europe, Africa, and South America.
Wow, a global network.
They envisioned a global network of civilians armed with binoculars, telescopes, sound detectors, and ham radios, all feeding raw telemetry to centralized filter centers.
They were attempting to crowdsource a global early warning radar system using civilian biological sensors. It's incredibly ambitious.
Exactly. And the ICARF documents clearly state their underlying motive. They wrote, quote, "The Air Force investigation has either gone underground or else they have the answer and are hiding the fact from the public."
Very direct.
Very. But the FBI's response to all these groups was a cold bureaucratic brick wall. We see the standard form letter response in a memo regarding a man named J.A. Hennedy from London. He wrote to the FBI asking for jurisdiction to investigate reports of UFOs seen landing on the ground.
And the FBI said.
The FBI sent a polite but firm refusal, stating that investigating UFOs did not come within our investigative jurisdiction.
It was the ultimate bureaucratic stiff arm, not our department.
Yeah. But Judith Goodman's question, the one about whether other countries were seeing these things, that was incredibly prescient. Because the FBI files absolutely prove this was a global phenomenon, not an American psychological quirk.
It was happening everywhere.
Everywhere. The files contain dispatches from embassies and legal attaches all over the world. Take this one from November 1957 from the legal attaché in Havana, Cuba. The Havana daily newspaper Diario de la Marina reported that two men, Jose Maria Nieto and Carmelo Guzman, had just arrived from the Matahambre mines in Pinar del Rio province.
And what do they see?
They claimed to have seen a flying disc hovering low over the general area of the mines for several minutes.
And pay close attention to the structural description they provide.
Yes. They said it was larger than ordinary airplanes, shaped somewhat like a man's hat, and that it was completely silent in its flight before it disappeared at a very high speed towards the sea. Let's stop right there. A massive craft hovering over a mining operation in Cuba, accelerating to high speed, completely silently. How does a physical object displace that much air at that speed without creating a deafening acoustic signature? We are talking about a sonic boom, or at least the roar of turbine engines.
The absence of sound is one of the most perplexing physical variables in these reports. If an object accelerates through the atmosphere, it creates friction, turbulence, and acoustic waves.
It has to make noise.
To do so silently suggests the craft is operating within a localized vacuum. Or it is utilizing a form of propulsion like magnetohydrodynamics, which ionizes the air around the craft and propels it electromagnetically, theoretically eliminating the friction and the sonic boom. The witnesses in Cuba are describing propulsion physics that are still entirely theoretical today.
That is just, it's wild to think about. And it wasn't just the West or the Caribbean experiencing this. The phenomenon was piercing the Iron Curtain.
Oh, the Soviets were dealing with it too.
We have files detailing the Soviet perspective, which is fascinating given the Cold War paranoia. There's a clipping about a prominent Soviet scientist, F. Ziegel. He was one of the editors of a book called Inhabited Cosmos and the chief editor of a journal from the Soviet Academy of Sciences.
So, highly credentialed academic.
Very. He worked at the Central Aerological Observatory near Moscow. He reported that Soviet military radar screens had been detecting unidentified flying objects for 20 years. He referred to them on the scopes as angel echoes.
The geopolitical context here is incredibly important. In the 1950s, the official, state-controlled Soviet press actively scoffed at American reports of flying saucers.
They made fun of us.
Constantly. They dismissed them as capitalist propaganda designed to distract the working class, or as secret American psychological warfare weapons designed to cause panic. So when their own radar operators saw them, the Soviet brass tried to wave them away as optical illusions, temperature inversions, or unknown atmospheric phenomena.
But Ziegel pushed back hard against his own government's narrative. He stated that the idea that swarms of insects or plant seeds could cause such massive solid radar returns on military scopes was absurd.
Bugs on a radar scope.
Right. He openly stated that the spaceship theory that these were physical craft from an advanced civilization maneuvering intelligently could not be ruled out. He publicly called for a all-sided, thorough, scientific exploration to clear up the origin of UFOs.
It's a remarkable historical parallel.
Yeah.
You have brilliant scientists in the U.S. and scientists in the Soviet Union, separated by the massive ideological chasm of the Cold War, fighting their respective military bureaucracies for the exact same thing.
Errancy.
Transparent, rigorous scientific investigation into a phenomenon that their instruments were undeniably tracking.
And sometimes, the global reach of this topic takes a turn into the utterly surreal and unexpected. This brings us to one of the most bizarre and, frankly, fascinating documents in the entire stack.
The embassy cable.
Yes. It's a much more recent file. A U.S. embassy cable from Turkmenistan from the 2003-2004 era. The subject line is, Turkmenistan Civil Society and UFOs.
This specific document illustrates the evolution of how the U.S. government had to interact with the UFO topic over time. They transitioned from treating it purely as a military threat to navigating it as a complex diplomatic and sociological reality.
So the cable details how the Deputy Chief of Mission and the USA Director met with a group called the Union of Ufologists located in Turkmenabad. This group was the very first NGO, non-governmental organization to register after Turkmenistan's independence from the Soviet Union in 1992.
Just let that sink in for a minute. The first legally recognized independent civil organization in the entire country was dedicated to the study of UFOs.
That is hilarious. But here is the amazing twist. The cable notes that while the Union was initially established to pursue the study of life on other planets, over time their activities became highly practical.
Practical how?
They essentially transformed into a legal consulting firm and a humanitarian aid group. They were working on an $8,500 grant to help other local NGOs navigate the oppressive government registration process. They ran community courses on accounting, computer literacy, and, naturally, ufology and massage therapy.
An incredibly diverse, if eccentric, portfolio of services.
Truly. But because of their established track record, their legal standing, and the respect they commanded from local authorities, partly because the president of the union claimed everyone is interested in UFOs, they actually became an official partner of the United States State Department.
Wait, really?
Yes, they facilitated the distribution of U.S. government-funded humanitarian assistance, handing out blankets and food to refugees from the Civil War in Tajikistan and Afghan refugees. I read this and I was stunned. The U.S. government is utilizing a UFO club to distribute aid.
If we synthesize the sociological implications of this cable, it is profoundly revealing. It demonstrates how the topic of UFOs transcends mere sightings of lights in the sky. It became a vital sociological tool.
There's a loophole.
Exactly. In a highly controlled, post-Soviet society where political gathering is dangerous, assembling to discuss space brothers or life on other planets might have been one of the very few safe, unmonitored ways for intellectuals, lawyers, and scientists to organize, network, and quietly build a civil society framework.
The U.S. Embassy official who authored the cable summed it up perfectly in their final, highly classified comment. They wrote, "Crazy, like a fox, and worthy of USG attention and support." The U.S. government was literally funneling taxpayer-funded humanitarian aid through a UFO organization because they were the most competent, highly organized group in the province.
It's a brilliant example of pragmatic, realpolitik diplomacy. The U.S. government didn't care if the group was scanning the skies for aliens. They cared that the group had the logistics network to deliver blankets efficiently. But this incredible story also highlights the double-edged sword of civilian involvement in ufology. On one hand, you have serious, dedicated organizations like ICARF trying to crowdsource radar data, or the Union of Ufologists doing vital civil work. On the other hand, as civilian interest exploded, it inevitably attracted an element that made the government want to run screaming in the opposite direction.
Which brings us to the fringe, because as much as we want to focus on the serious 1,200-mile-per-hour radar tracks and the credible commercial pilots, we are obligated to look at the circus that surrounded it.
We have to. It's part of the history.
And honestly, analyzing this fringe element might explain the exact reason why the government felt so compelled to suppress the topic. It wasn't just about hiding crash technology in a hangar. It was about managing public sanity during an incredibly fragile era.
The legitimate signal, the verifiable data we've been talking about, was getting completely, hopelessly drowned out by the noise. And that noise reached a deafening, hysterical pitch in the late 1950s.
Let's examine the post-Sputnik wave. It's November 1957. The Russians have just successfully launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, into orbit. The entire world is staring up at the night sky with a mixture of profound awe and absolute existential terror.
Sputnik changed everything.
And the FBI files from this exact moment describe a massive, unprecedented, nationwide spike in UFO reports.
The psychological trigger of the Sputnik launch cannot be overstated. Overnight, the sky was no longer a vast protective blanket. It was an active, militarized arena where the enemy possessed the ultimate high ground. Every light in the sky was suddenly a potential Soviet weapon.
The internal FBI memo sent to A.H. Belmont from R.R. Roach outlines the sheer madness of the situation. They write that the Air Force was flooded with calls and the newspapers were full of reports. Let me read you some of these incidents that occurred within just a 2-week period.
Yes, 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. In Vernal, Utah, an unknown object looking like the moon and trailing a blue flame that pulsed like a heart reportedly landed in a field. In Nebraska, a massive object landed, and 6 occupants reportedly stepped out and talked to a farmer before speeding off into space.
Notice the escalation there. We've crossed the threshold from observing distant lights in the sky to claiming direct physical interaction with occupants on the ground.
Exactly. The stories get crazier. There was a fiery object flashing from Georgia down to Miami. A Coast Guard cutter sighted a huge structured object flying low over the Gulf of Mexico. And perhaps most terrifyingly for the average citizen, there were widespread reports across the southwestern states of people driving their cars late at night and having their engines mysteriously stall and stop while UFOs passed overhead.
The electromagnetic effect on vehicles stopping engines, draining batteries, killing headlights is a classic element of UFO lore. But think about the physics of that for a moment.
How does that happen?
To stop a 1950s car engine, which relies on a mechanical distributor cap, an ignition coil, and spark plugs.
Yeah.
You have to project an electromagnetic field intense enough to disrupt the flow of high-voltage electricity or induce a massive surge that shorts the coil.
That takes a lot of power.
Massive power. In 1957, experiencing that represents a profound, terrifying loss of control. It implies a technology that can reach down from the sky and effortlessly disable human machinery.
The Air Force investigated all of these reports and officially deemed them non-authentic, stating there was no scientific basis for the sightings. But the memo notes that the FBI was going to keep a very close eye on future reports.
Why the FBI?
Not because they were hunting for Martians. The memo explicitly states they had a particular interest in matters concerning espionage and sabotage. They were terrified that Soviet intelligence agents might be utilizing the nationwide UFO panic as a psychological cover to test electronic warfare weapons, test the response times of U.S. air defenses, or sabotage infrastructure under the guise of alien encounters.
And while the FBI is frantically searching for Soviet saboteurs hiding in the panic, a massive, highly vocal subculture is sprouting up that completely blurs the lines between science, organized religion, and science fiction. We are entering the bizarre era of the contactees.
The contactees, man, these aren't pilots tracking blips on a radar. These are individuals who claim they're having regular, direct, often telepathic communication with extraterrestrial beings.
It's a whole different level.
The FBI files contain extensive, detailed tracking of these individuals. Take George W. Van Tassel. He was holding massive conventions in the desert at a place called Giant Rock, California, drawing thousands of people.
Van Tassel was a central, almost messianic figure in the contactee movement. He famously claimed to receive telepathic instructions from aliens to build the Integratron.
What was the Integratron?
It was a massive dome-like structure that was supposed to act as a time machine and a cellular rejuvenation device.
You can't make this stuff up. The FBI had informants sitting in the audience taking notes on his speeches. In Denver, Van Tassel was preaching a new gospel that explicitly linked space people to the events described in the Bible.
Interesting blend of religion and aliens.
Yeah. He warned his followers that the detonation of the atom bomb was detrimental not just to Earth, but was causing vibrational damage to the entire universe. And he was confidently predicting that the global economy was fundamentally flawed and would soon collapse, to be replaced by the utopian ideas brought by these space people.
You can immediately see why the FBI is taking copious notes. He's mixing virulent anti-nuclear sentiment with economic doom, saying all wrapped up in an appealing New Age cosmic religion.
Right in the middle of the Cold War.
Exactly. A charismatic leader telling thousands of people that the U.S. government's nuclear policy is destroying the universe and that the economy is about to crash is viewed as a severe, destabilizing threat, regardless of whether he claims the information came from Venus.
And the lore these contactees build gets so incredibly dense and specific. There's a document in the files titled Flying Saucer News in Brief from 1966. It serves as a chronicle of the activities of various fringe groups. It details a woman named Hope Troxel in Lone Pine, California, claiming that her entire town experienced partial blackouts during an evening channeling session where a telepathic voice supposedly spoke through her, promising the audience that they were the guardians of the race.
It is pure science fiction manifesting as a collective religious experience.
It mentions booths set up at a teenage fair in Los Angeles where representatives answered 13,000 questions from youths over a 12-hour period. It details claims of infiltration by an alien race called the Corendians.
The Corendians, that is a deep cut into UFO mythology.
Yes, entities hailing from the planet Corendor. The distributed literature confidently claims they have already infiltrated Earth and are secretly working amongst us. They supposedly speak a rhythmic, highly musical language characterized by sibilant sounds, lots of Z's and Z's noises. And these Corendians supposedly intervened behind the scenes to stop nuclear disasters in places like the Soviet Union and Vietnam. The sheer volume of intricate world building is staggering.
And then, of course, you have the most famous and perhaps most audacious of them all, George Adamski.
The FBI files dedicate a significant section to George Adamski. He claimed to have flown around the moon in a flying saucer and to have been in constant contact with blonde, beautiful Venusian.
Venusians?
Yeah. The FBI files explicitly note he was widely accused by researchers of being a charlatan and a faker who produced fake photographs of spaceships using chicken brooders and light bulbs. But despite that reputation, he achieved an insane, almost unbelievable level of global access. The files reference a heavily publicized, highly controversial private meeting Adamski supposedly secured with Queen Juliana of the Netherlands at her royal palace in 1959.
A man claiming to take joyrides in spaceships with Venusians, somehow bypassing royal security to get a private audience with a reigning European monarch.
The international press went absolutely wild. The Dutch papers viciously accused the Queen of falling for strange cults and embarrassing the nation, while the palace desperately defended her, stating she simply had an open mind to all events.
Okay, let's step back and synthesize the totality of what we are looking at here. How do you, as someone reviewing these files, reconcile this absolute circus, the Corinthians, the Venusians, the telepaths, the cult leaders, predicting economic collapse with the hard data?
It's so hard to put them in the same box.
How do you reconcile George Adamski selling fake photos with the highly trained radar operators tracking silent 1,200 mile-per-hour disks over the Oak Ridge nuclear facility?
That is exactly the massive leap in logic I'm struggling with. I mean, with all this incredibly loud noise, teenagers asking 13,000 questions at a fair, guys building time machines in the desert, how could the government, or any serious academic for that matter, take the legitimate radar operators and the 3,000-hour pilots seriously? Didn't the contactees essentially ruin the credibility of the entire subject for the professionals?
You've hit the nail on the head. This dynamic is the exact reason the topic became politically, academically, and scientifically radioactive for decades.
Because it was too embarrassing.
The legitimate, unexplained military encounters, the undeniable physical evidence, like the rebounding dirt samples, the verified pilot sightings, the signal, were completely hopelessly drowned out by the contactee movement and the mass public panic and noise.
It was guilt by association on a massive scale. If a pilot reports a disc, he's immediately lumped in with the guy claiming to talk to Venusians.
Precisely. If a four-star Air Force general goes to a podium and admits that they are tracking unexplainable hypersonic disks over our most sensitive nuclear bases, the public doesn't react with measured scientific curiosity.
Not in the 1950s.
Given the atmosphere of the 1950s, the public immediately assumes George Van Tassel is right, that the Venusians are here to collapse the global economy and that the Corinthians are living next door. The government minimized and actively ridiculed the information, not necessarily because they were hiding dead aliens in a subterranean hangar, but to prevent the public from jumping at shadows, falling for charismatic charlatans, or being manipulated by foreign psychological warfare during the absolute most tense moments of the Cold War.
That makes so much sense.
The ridicule, the weather balloon excuses, the Condon Committee, it was all a defense mechanism designed to maintain societal stability.
Wow. So the cover-up, or the systematic minimization we see in these files, wasn't necessarily about hoarding exotic technology. It was about controlling the human reaction to the unknown.
Managing the panic.
The government felt the truth, whatever it was, would break the social fabric. That framework makes so much sense when you look at the entire scope of these documents. And that profound realization brings us to the end of our journey today, to our reflection on what this all actually means.
If we reflect on the journey we've taken today, from the high-altitude sightings in the 1940s to the sociological impacts detailed in modern embassy cables, the evolution of the narrative is just stunning.
It really is.
The conversation around UFOs and UAPs is no longer limited to the fringe, to the contactees, or to late-night conspiracy circles. By looking closely at these official declassified documents, we see undeniably that the phenomenon was tracked, rigorously studied, and furiously debated at the absolute highest levels of the military and intelligence communities. The reality was always there.
Yeah.
We just weren't allowed to see the raw data.
And as we wrap up part one of this massive deep dive into the archives, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on the incredible physics and data we've just discussed. We know for a fact from the Wright-Patterson memo that the Air Force was sending physical dirt samples from anomalous landing sites to the FBI laboratory in 1948.
Yeah.
We know they were tracking solid objects at 40,000 feet over the Oak Ridge nuclear site with early, primitive 1950s cathode ray radar.
The technology that, while cutting edge then, is practically prehistoric by today's standards.
Exactly. The files we just looked at are over 50 years old, so ask yourself this. With the incredible exponential advancements in modern military sensors, satellite optical imaging, phased array radar systems that can track a baseball in low Earth orbit, forward-looking infrared targeting pods on F-18 fighter jets, what kind of data are they collecting today?
It's mind-boggling to think about.
If they had physical trace evidence and radar tracks in 1948, what is sitting in a highly classified, digital file cabinet right now, just waiting for the next wave of disclosure. The phenomenon hasn't stopped. Our instruments have just gotten infinitely better at recording it.
It's a sobering, awe-inspiring thought. The files we reviewed today prove that we are only looking at the very tip of a deeply entrenched, highly classified apparatus.
Which is exactly why this is only the beginning of our investigation. This was just part one. We have far more files, far more complex cases, and deeply credible testimonies from military personnel to explore in the coming installments of this series. We are going to keep opening these folders and examining the data.
There is a mountain of evidence left to process, and the patterns only become more pronounced the deeper you dig.
The expectation of precision, the desire for a clean answer showing exactly what these objects are, is natural. We don't have that perfect, clean answer yet, but the muddy waters of the past are finally starting to clear, and the shapes moving beneath the surface are undeniable. Thank you for exploring the unknown with me on GL Deep Dives. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to follow and subscribe because the deeper we go, the stranger reality begins to look.